My name is Michael French, this is Melinda Mock, and we are going to hopefully entertain you for the next hour. The lightsaber is the most distinct visual in the Star Wars saga. Whether you want to admit it or not, you know, no matter how many times you see a cool photo of Han Solo posed with his blaster or an X-Wing fighter, the lightsaber is undeniably the most recognizable element. And the evidence is clear. If you look at the promotional material from even the original trilogy, they used the lightsaber all the time in the posters. It was everywhere. And like many elements of Star Wars, the lightsaber was not a unique construct of Star Wars. The lightsaber was inspired by earlier works of fiction. Most notably, Kaldar, World of Antares. Melinda knows a little bit more about this than I do, so I'll let her take this one.
I mean, a lot of these things came out of pulp magazines at the time in the 30s. This particular Kaldar World of Antares came out in 1933. It was written by Edmund Hamilton, who interestingly was married to Lee Brackett, who some of you may recognize the name. She wrote the first
draft of The Empire Strikes Back.
So just kind of a serendipitous coincidence there.
But it was Star Wars that really cemented this visual for us in pop culture. Star Wars, while not inventing the lightsaber, it sort of co-opted it and owned it. And so now the lightsaber is intrinsically linked to Star Wars, and no one remembers Kaldar, World of Antares. But laser swords were not, they were not originally depicted as lightsabers in the initial concept art. In John Malo's early character renderings, they're referred to as laser batons. And in Ralph McQuarrie's earliest paintings, they're not limited to the Jedi. You actually have stormtroopers using them as sidearms as well. George Lucas liked to refer to them as laser swords. That was his original name for them. I think he really has a soft spot for it, and so it still leaks into the saga.
I saw your laser sword. Only Jedis carry that kind of weapon.
Having a laser sword doesn't make you a Jedi.
This will be the first time you actually see him pull out that little laser sword of his and go to town.
I don't know if this is true. I couldn't find the facts to verify it because over 35 years, 35 years of loving Star Wars, I've heard all kinds of stories and read all kinds of books, but I couldn't find all of it. I've heard the rumor that Alec Guinness was the one that renamed the laser sword lightsaber for the production. My understanding of this is that he felt it was a more elegant way to describe the weapon as it was in the context of the story. So it's kind of cool then that Alec Guinness named the lightsaber and then literally gave it to us in the movie by giving it to Mark Hamill in the first scene. He introduced us to the lightsaber as well as named it. The original lightsaber hilt, this is ground zero for a lot of lightsaber enthusiasts like myself. It was actually a very simple prop. The British guys at Elstree Studios developed this from a Graflex flash attachment, which was a handle that was used on 1940s cameras. If you've seen the 1930s and 40s movies where they have the big press cameras and they pop the bulbs out, the handle that's on the side is Luke Skywalker's original lightsaber. And what they did was they simply removed the reflector on the top. Subsequently, they put a calculator bubble from a Texas Instruments calculator in the clamp, and they put T-track for sliding cabinet doors on the bottom. So this would be T-track for cabinet doors. And then of course they put a belt clip on the bottom, and that's a lightsaber. Because it had this cool Art Deco design, it had this weird otherworldly feel, and no one really recognized it outside the context of being part of a camera. The lightsaber was on the set physically during the production. The very first movie had a unique way of trying to achieve this because the special effects were so revolutionary at the time. They were pioneering new techniques. They didn't really know how to solve all of it. So the very first movie had a lightsaber effect technique where it was a physical rod with reflective material wrapped around it. And then there was a motor inside the handle, and it would spin the rod really fast so that the camera picked up the reflected light and the blade would look white when it came out on film. But if you look at this photo very closely, sometimes the power cord running up the actor's sleeve would slip through. When Luke first uses the lightsaber in Ben's hut, when he moves his arm, he has those baggy sleeves from that like Karate Kid shirt, and you can see the battery pack hanging inside his sleeve. Some fan editors have removed this. This white effect actually showed up in the earliest trailers of the movie when the effects weren't done. And at the time, George Lucas knew that that effect wasn't going to be viable. He wanted something better. The other problem with this effect was because the spinning blades were so finicky and fragile, That's why Alec Guinness and Darth Vader fight so geriatrically. It's not because they're old men, it's because if they hit the blades too hard, the blades would snap off the prop. And so they had to be real ginger with the whole process. They brought in a Korean animator to fix this issue, and he was a master rotoscope artist. And he's the one that said, you know what, let's hand airbrush all of these blades, and we'll brush the colors right onto them because this effect isn't working. This is an example of some misaligned rotoscoping. They had to perfect the process, but it involved sort of projecting the negative and then a frame by frame and then airbrushing onto another piece of celluloid over it and trying to get the effect right on the film. This led to some confusion in the toy market because the earliest images that were being sent to Kenner were these white blades, and depending on how the photographs were developed, the Kenner toy company interpreted that as yellow. And so you have the original Luke Skywalker action figures coming with a yellow lightsaber. The Ben Kenobi figures were even more confused because he was airbrushed with a yellow lightsaber on the packaging, but he came with a blue one as the toy itself, except for the doll, where the doll was yellow on the box and yellow in the box. I know that you guys are probably like, wait, what? So we're just gonna ride right past that. We're gonna move on to the next thing. The confusion with Luke Skywalker's lightsaber throughout the Kenner run was continual. They kept the yellow lightsaber in Empire Strikes Back, even though the special effects had gotten better. I do not have an answer for you as to why that occurred. I don't know. And then for Return of the Jedi, and we'll get to this in more detail in a minute, they made it blue, even though his lightsaber was green, but we do have an answer for that. The toys were also confused, as I said before. You had the Inflatable Toy, which was the first one from 1979. That one was yellow, as you can see on the box. That toy really needs to be inflated. It kind of looks gross when it's not. And then you have the Force Lightsaber from 1980. Again, even though Luke's was blue, they made his yellow and they made Darth Vader's red. Now, in 1983, they changed Luke's to green and kept Darth Vader's red. Darth Vader's actual prop was also made from a camera flash. It was made from a camera flash known as an MPP micro flash. This was very similar in silhouette, coincidentally, to the Graflex that Luke's was made out of, which is a, well, but it's a happy accident because in the original script, Darth Vader was not already Luke's father. That was actually worked out when they developed The Empire Strikes Back. So the fact that the lightsabers look similar up front was a nice coincidence because it tied everything together. Obi-Wan Kenobi's, on the other hand, is not as straightforward. This is a cool image that was sent to us by a friend of ours from the RPF he calls himself James Kenobi 1138. There's a whole cult around the Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber hilt. I'm just going to read this off the slide because it's impossible to rattle this off otherwise. From the bottom to the top, Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber is a sink knob, a sink faucet handle from a company called Armitage Shanks Starlight. Then you have a Browning machine gun booster component. Yeah. Then you have a Graflex clamp like this one right here in the middle. They pulled one of those off. Then the middle grip is a World War I British rifle grenade. Then the top part of it is a Rolls-Royce jet engine balance pipe. So the whole thing was put together on either a threaded rod or a wooden dowel. And these geniuses, and I do mean genius, I'm not being sarcastic, at Elstree Studios were like, well, Roy, if we put that together and that together and that, I think that'll be a good handle, yeah? That'll be great. I mean, and when you look at it here, when you look at the final saber hilt, it's gorgeous. I mean, it really looks like an otherworldly piece, but it's constructed from all these various components. And there's a whole cult of fandom around this lightsaber because of its complexity. But by this time in the trilogy, it seems like Obi-Wan's saber had gotten old and a little beat up because it wasn't cauterizing wounds anymore. When he would cut somebody's arm off, there'd be blood everywhere. But that's not what a lightsaber is supposed to do.
It's laser.
So what I have to assume is that Obi-Wan's saber was either damaged and just wearing out, or in his fight with Walrus Man, aka Ponda Baba, and his fight with Darth Vader later, it was running low on batteries. And if you think that I'm just joking, there is precedence for this theory.
If you knew the power of the dark side.
Still going. Nothing outlasts the Energizer battery. It keeps going and going.
I couldn't resist, sorry. So, Ben loses his lightsaber to Vader, and we really don't know where that lightsaber ends up. We still haven't caught up with it in the saga. Some people argue it blew up on the Death Star. Other people say that Darth Vader wouldn't have let that happen. He would have had it with him in his TIE fighter. I don't know why he would have it in his TIE fighter, whatever. However, Luke's lightsaber, on the other hand, the one that Ben Kenobi gave him, it goes home with him to Hoth. But before it gets to Hoth, it goes on a little bit of a journey if you read the expanded universe. The very first expanded novel is Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Alan Dean Foster. And in it, Luke uses his lightsaber in one scene to pick a lock by adjusting the settings to the point that the blade goes down to a needle point. And then he is able to cut through the lock. Now, you might think that's a little crazy. I like to think of it as Anakin's lightsabers were more advanced. They actually have a different silhouette than most of the other lightsabers. Most lightsabers are very symmetrical in design, like even Obi-Wan's is very symmetrical. Anakin's sabers are very asymmetrical. They've got knobs and buttons all over them. He was a mechanic. You don't know how he might have pulled this off. And even though we never see anybody do this again in the classic era through the prequels, we have recently seen this ability of the lightsaber come back into canon.
There's a control on the side that adjusts the length to your height.
So they've brought this ability back, and now it seems that they can apply it to all lightsabers. So canon is always evolving and changing as we go. In the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, another lightsaber mythology element is born, which is the Kyber Crystal, although it's very different in this novel. That's what Luke and Leia are searching for in this adventure, and the Kyber Crystal at that time was an element that would help you focus your force powers. You could use it as almost like a lodestone to help you focus your abilities. This, of course, would change later, as we've seen from Rogue One, but we'll get into that later in the presentation. So along the way to Hoth, Luke, he sort of tinkers with his lightsaber a little bit, at least as far as the prop goes. We have to assume that either he or R2-D2 or some very enterprising rebel mechanic was able to help improve the lightsaber, so the prop changes. So if you look at the one on the right, it's the one from the original film. It has the grips on the bottom with the calculator bubble, and otherwise it's just a Graflex flash. Now on the Empire one on the left, he's got nice notched riveted grips, and he's got this sort of circuit board instead, this gold striped circuit board, and he's added a button on the far end. So now it has two buttons, one on either side. Normally, as you can see from the New Hope one, this side is usually a glass test lamp, like a glass bulb, but now it's two buttons. So the prop is changing because they have a better budget. They want it to look a little nicer. He's also using it more, but he's still not a trained Jedi. He's using this more like a machete. It's almost like a tool he's got on his belt and to get him out of some scrapes. It's the same way Han uses it to cut open the Tauntaun. Luke is not adept at using this as a weapon yet, but it does create what I feel is my favorite moment in The Empire Strikes Back. Luke using this weapon as a machete type weapon rather than the fancy Jedi weapon that he'll learn to use it as. I just wanted to show you this scene. But that's always been my favorite scene in The Empire Strikes Back, because Luke can single-handedly destroy an AT-AT because he's got this weapon that can cut through anything, which is awesome. And he was supposed to train with this weapon with Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back, but they cut the scene, which is unfortunate because we see him later on, having never trained with the weapon, being able to fight Darth Vader for a little while. The scene doesn't exist in any finished form, but what we've done for this presentation is we've gone and gotten the clips that do exist, and we've cut them together to sort of assemble the scene for you. So the idea here was that Yoda throws the bar up in the air. And Luke is supposed to be able, without seeing it, to turn around and cut it into 17 pieces. But he misses the bar entirely. He misses the bar. He misses the bar entirely, and Yoda chastises him for it. This scene actually shows up in the Marvel Comics adaptation of Empire Strikes Back from 1980. So if you want to see the actual scene in totality, you can read the Marvel comic. It has it in there. In Empire Strikes Back, behind the scenes, they ditched the spinning blade motor effect because it was too fragile. They needed to have Luke and Darth Vader really be able to go to town on one another with these weapons. And they went with metal rods. And they covered the metal rods in the same reflective material so that you would get, you know, the light effect as needed. But they knew they were going to rotoscope over them anyway. And what's funny about this, or not funny, but coincidental or ironic, or however you want to describe it, is that the metal rods actually caused Mark Hamill to almost lose his hand because his thumb and finger got hit during a take, and he had to be taken off the production for a few weeks to heal. So the real Luke Skywalker accidentally almost really lost his hand to a lightsaber during The Empire Strikes Back. So yeah, there's Mark losing the lightsaber in production, but of course that's a fake hand. And it's too bad that Yoda's training scene was cut out because he might have won that fight. In 1983, we finally get the first lightsaber in video games, and this is from the Atari 2600 game Jedi Arena. Now, this establishes that lightsabers apparently can bend right in the middle of the blade, which I thought was only possible if you had the Schwartz. But Atari proved me wrong. So in Revenge of the Jedi, and yes, I say Revenge of the Jedi, this is where lightsaber history really gets weird, because you have Luke Skywalker with a green lightsaber that he built when he had to get a new lightsaber because he lost his on Cloud City. Now, you think that that was always intended, but it really wasn't, because Lucas's idea was that the good guys were blue and the bad guys were red, and that was how he had envisioned it. But the desert played him wrong, because the early rotoscoping animation didn't show up well against the desert sunlight. And so when they tested this, and you can actually see this, we didn't Photoshop this, this is from the Revenge of the Jedi trailer from 1982. They still had the blue effects, so they could get a trailer out, right? They said, no, we got to change that. So they re-rotoscoped the lightsaber to green to make sure that it stood out against the Arizona sun. Well, they didn't tell Kenner in time. So Kenner started out with a blue lightsaber for their Jedi Luke figure and then quickly revised it to be green because they were like, wait, you guys changed the special effects? Oh, come on. So that's why that occurred. It wasn't to wow the audience. It wasn't to say, ooh, look, new color. Like it was just a mistake. The green blade only exists because of a brighter special effect. Otherwise, it would have been blue and red. But there's a theory for this. Coincidentally, Qui-Gon Jinn had a green lightsaber. Obi-Wan kills Darth Maul with Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber, and then we never see that lightsaber again. Luke Skywalker then has to use parts from Obi-Wan Kenobi's house to build his lightsaber before he goes to fight Jabba. He has to get parts from Obi-Wan. Are you following me on this? So he probably used the crystal from Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber, which is why it's green. Now again, that's some kind of weird backwards retcon explanation for why this happened, but it's still cool nonetheless. The video games, on the other hand, at the time, the Nintendo games, were still getting the blade wrong. So Luke's lightsaber in Star Wars, the game for Nintendo, was yellow, and in The Empire Strikes Back, they flipped them, and Luke's was red, and Darth Vader's was blue. Which, when you fight your way to the end of that game, because it's so frustrating, and the lightsaber's the wrong color, you're just like, ah! You know. Luke's lightsaber in Return of the Jedi looks very similar to Obi-Wan Kenobi's. You might think this makes sense because he built it from parts from Obi-Wan Kenobi's house, and there's a sort of idea in the mythology that a Jedi Padawan makes their lightsaber sort of in the reflective image of their teacher or master. But there's more complex explanation that's about to happen with this one, because behind the scenes, it's weird. This is a brand new lightsaber on the right. That's Luke's lightsaber on the right, and Obi-Wan's on the left. Yeah, that's me holding them awkwardly. But Luke's lightsaber is supposed to be brand new, and it looks beaten to all get out. It looks super weathered, and that's the way it looks when it comes launching out of R2-D2's head. and Luke catches it. So why is it so beaten up already if it's never been used? The one on the bottom is the one you most often see in licensing. It's very polished, it has a copper neck on it, it looks very pretty. But that lightsaber is only in 2 shots in Return of the Jedi. It's in the shot where Vader says, "I see you have constructed a new lightsaber," which is an insert. Sorry for my bad Vader impression. And then it's in the deleted scene where Luke is finishing his lightsaber in the cave. So this lightsaber was constructed late in the game. The other lightsaber, the beaten up one, is all over the movie. It's on the Emperor's throne. It's being put in Luke's face by Darth Vader in the same scene where it cuts to the insert. It's the one Luke catches over the Sarlacc. It's also the one Luke uses against the speeder bike on Endor. Now, this is the first scene that was filmed in Return of the Jedi, but it was deleted. It was the sandstorm sequence, and you can see it on the Blu-ray. You can see it on the deleted scenes on the Blu-ray. If you look at the bottom photos, you see that Luke is wearing the correct lightsaber. But in the top photo, Mark Hamill is talking to George Lucas before they start shooting, and he's holding the lightsaber from The Empire Strikes Back. So you ask yourself, well, if they've already got a prop for him for Return of the Jedi, why is the lightsaber from Empire Strikes Back on the set of this movie? What is it doing there? What you start to realize is that they didn't have this pinned down. The lightsaber props were all just still in a closet at Elstree Studios, and they'd break them out every time they started a new production. This is Luke's polished lightsaber from the hero prop from Return of the Jedi on the left, and then Obi-Wan's famous cob job on the right. The prevailing mythology was always that it looked the same because Obi-Wan was Yoda. Hold on, please. That Obi-Wan was Luke's teacher. But in this next shot, you'll see there's Mark Hamill with the lightsaber from Empire, about to start filming Return of the Jedi. And then if you've ever watched Pop Culture Quest, which is the Comic-Con web show, there was an episode where Mark Hamill was reunited with this prop because this prop is now privately owned by a guy named Brandon Allinger. When Mark Hamill saw it, Brandon Allinger said, yes, when I acquired this lightsaber handle, it had a spinning emitter on the top. The disc there on the left, that disc spins, and there were electronics inside. And he was like, I couldn't figure it out. And it's confusing because, next slide, if you look at Return of the Jedi's behind the scenes, much like Empire, they're using the metal rod technique from Empire Strikes Back with no spinning motor, nothing like that. If you look closer into the behind the scenes photos from Empire Strikes Back, you will see Mark Hamill practicing with the beaten up lightsaber from Return of the Jedi. And then if you go backwards another movie, you find out, oh, the lightsaber he's carrying in Return of the Jedi is Alec Guinness's fighting lightsaber from the original film. So they just took the blade off and gave it to him to wear on his belt for the whole movie because they didn't want to use this saber again, but I think because they realized, we just saw this saber fall into infinity. We can't use it again, it's going to be confusing. What do we do? Give him this one, here. Snap, give him that one. And then when they did that, they had to make a nice one for the inserts. So Luke Skywalker's lightsaber in Return of the Jedi is actually Obi-Wan Kenobi's. Crazy, right? Yeah, I know. Woo. So, lightsabers were walking off the set all the time between movies. By the time they got to Return of the Jedi, the Darth Vader lightsabers had all been lost. So on the top left, you see the one from Empire Strikes Back. That's an original that surfaced finally. The one on the bottom is his from Return of the Jedi. They used a Luke Skywalker Graphlex saber to make that. They drilled holes in it, they did crazy stuff to it. That's part of the reason why to this day, there is only one original Luke Skywalker lightsaber like this in the Lucasfilm archives. There's only one. And they think it's from the Dagobah sequences, but otherwise, there's none left. Footnote to this is that the Power of the Force toys in the 90s modeled their Darth Vader lightsaber after the Return of the Jedi version. It's got all those weird bolts and holes through it. And the Star Wars lightsaber toys at this point had really taken a leap forward. Now they had electronic sounds and lights, and they telescoped. They kind of looked like a big air traffic controller thing. When you get to the prequels, you know, they say that things were always better back in the day. Well, the prequels kind of prove that lightsabers were a lot prettier back in the past, because all of the lightsabers in the prequels were not camera parts and junk you found in a jet engine bin. They were all custom machined. and they were sleek and they were elegant, and it was because they had a massive budget for those movies. You know, $100 million a movie. And the really cool thing about this for the actors is that unlike Mark Hamill and Alec Guinness, who were just told, yeah, here's this camera flash, just wave it around and pretend it's a sword, like, and you don't have a choice, you're like, all right, George. These guys actually got to pick their own handles.
This is my favorite one.
That's the one.
Yeah, I thought you might pick that one.
They got to pick their own lightsabers out of this cool box. They bring in this big foam, suitcase, and they'd open it up and they'd just say, pick your handle. And they just, what? And so Ewan McGregor got to pick first, and then Liam Neeson, and it went down the line. But Ewan McGregor's lightsaber, as you probably noticed by now, doesn't look anything like Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber from the original film. They were needing to design slimmer handles because the lightsaber fighting was about to get really intense and really fast. The lightsaber fighting had gone to a new level. That picture on the bottom of Ewan McGregor, you can see he's almost more like a ninja with a katana than he is the broadsword slashing fighting of the original movie. George Lucas had described to Mark Hamill back in the original trilogy that he wanted him to feel like he was holding Excalibur. That's how he described it to him. Mark Hamill actually said, hey, we're really good with these lightsabers. Can we do fancier stuff? And George Lucas was like, no. I just want you to like really just hit with it, and he's like, oh, all right. And then when Mark Hamill saw these movies, he was like, he actually came out and was like, oh, we would have had so much fun doing that. We could have done that. But this is a double-edged saber because when you get into, right. I didn't say there wouldn't be bad puns in this. I said maybe. You can go too far, and you can get to the point where you're doing things like this, where it's like, it's more like a dance-off than it is trying to kill your enemy. It's like, look what I can do. But if you think there wasn't any lightsaber confusion back then, you'd be wrong, because there was still some lightsaber confusion going on behind the scenes. Mace Windu has 3 different lightsabers throughout the course of the prequel saga, in print only. The original visual dictionary has him with a lightsaber that looks very similar to Darth Maul's, half of Darth Maul's saber. And then later on, like a few months later, they inexplicably change it to this. They Photoshop in another lightsaber that's very, very slim and elegant. And then in Attack of the Clones, of course, he has a brand new hilt entirely because he was going to fight, so he got to choose his weapon. Samuel Jackson, well, before I talk about this slide, I just want to say that they explain that in canon as, at some point around the events of Phantom Menace, Mace Windu and another Jedi trade lightsabers for a mission this guy has to go on. I guess the guy needed a purple blade or something. I don't know. So they explain it away like that. I'm not going to get into the details. But thanks to Samuel Jackson and Samuel Jackson alone, despite the fact that on the cover of Star Wars Insider in the 90s, we had a model, Shannon McRandall, playing Mara Jade with a purple blade. That wasn't canon. That was still just expanded universe. Samuel Jackson is single-handedly responsible for bringing us the purple-bladed lightsaber.
Trying to figure out who we had to talk to about your light color, your lightsaber color.
Oh, well, good guys are green and blue, bad guys are red. That's just the way it works.
No purple lightsaber?
You might get purple.
Look at his face. He's just so happy.
There are some people in this world that rank has no meaning. They're just like, you're the director, but I'm me.
And he's right.
He is. The prequels also gave us the first canon double-bladed saber. Now, once again, this double-bladed idea showed up in a non-canon Dark Horse comic from Tales of the Jedi. But the actual canon one, as we all know, was wielded by Darth Maul. And it also gave us the first canon dual-wielding lightsaber fight when Anakin fought Dooku. They showed us this shot in the trailer, and I kind of jumped out of my seat because I thought, Jedi with 2 sabers! Jedi with 2 sabers! Not realizing that that was one of the 2 shots in which he would fight with it before he was dispatched. It was just a little too brief. The prequels also changed the configuration of the lightsabers on the characters. So this lightsaber has a D-ring on the bottom so it can hang from a belt, right? Well, the prequel lightsabers are clipped with what are called a CoverTech belt clip, almost like you have it in a gun holster, like it's ready to go, it doesn't move around. the theory at the time, us fans were thinking about this. We're like, why did that change? Well, obviously for the purposes of the prequels, it changed so that the Jedi looked more ready and dynamic, and they didn't have to fumble on this belt hook to get. They could just draw, you know, and they'd be ready to go. The theory in mythology as to why the Jedi would start doing it like this is because the Jedi were in hiding. They'd been purged, and they needed this to look more like a tool than a weapon. So if it could hang from a tool belt's utility hook, it might be less conspicuous. That was the theory that we had in the late 90s and early aughts as fans. We felt justified by this because of what occurred in Rebels. If you look on the right, that's Canon. His lightsaber is in multiple parts, and when he has to use it, he pulls those parts from around his belt and puts it together, and then it's the lightsaber. And I'd like to think that's because he's trying to disguise it as different things so that he's not caught. You would think that Anakin's lightsaber in Attack of the Clones, when he finally is a Padawan learner, you would think that that lightsaber would look like the one that Obi-Wan gave Luke Skywalker. But as a matter of fact, that lightsaber actually looks identical to Darth Vader's with just more chrome. It's like Vader's with more bling, is what it is. Which I thought was interesting, because I was like, oh, he starts as a Vader saber, then goes to the one we know, and then goes to Darth Vader. We also get to see Yoda's lightsaber for the first time. This lightsaber was actually built for the Phantom Menace, but because Yoda was a physical puppet, they built it out of a small camera flash. Yeah, we're back to camera flashes, right? But they didn't use Yoda like that in the movie, and then they went to a digital model. But what does that flash look like? It looks like Luke Skywalker's lightsaber from the original film. So did Anakin model his after Yoda's? Does Yoda's have all sorts of cool gizmos on it? I don't know. And then in 2003, we saw the release of Knights of the Old Republic, and this really started a new Jedi subculture in Star Wars fandom, because suddenly you had all of the lightsaber colors. It was, you know, it was like Skittles. It was like every color. They all meant something. They all, and I felt justified when I saw this, because Bastila Shan, she carries a yellow lightsaber, and as a Kenner kid, I was like, yellow rocks. So that was cool to see that, because now we could get away from just, you know, red, blue, and green. The Clone Wars also, as a television show, expanded the mythology and the canon of the lightsabers big time. There were entire episodes devoted to just lightsabers, lightsaber mythology, how important they were to the Jedi, things like that. There's one episode we wanted to show you a clip from where it's all just about Ahsoka trying to get her lightsaber back from a pickpocket.
My lightsaber.
But whereas in the original trilogy, the lightsaber was sort of a rare and esoteric weapon because all the Jedi had been murdered, and probably Grievous had hoarded all of them in his display cases before he got killed. In the prequels, you know, and in the Clone Wars television show, the lightsaber really took on a broader mythology. These are images from an episode cycle where the Padawan learners have to find the Kyber crystals for their lightsabers and build them. This particular set of images is from the second episode of the cycle, where they go to a special ship after they've attained their crystals, and they get to pick the materials for their lightsabers. The Wookiee in the top left, the materials that he picks for his lightsaber are from a wood that's from his planet that's impervious to his claws, so that when he grabs the lightsaber handle, it doesn't get ruined, which is really neat. That is the previous episode where they have to go into an ice cave on a special planet to find the Kyber crystals that will power their lightsabers. The Kyber crystals will call to them, and they only have a set amount of hours to get their crystal before the ice wall closes and they're permanently trapped. So it's weird, because it's like, wait a second, the Jedi are benevolent warriors, but they're putting their kid students at risk. You know,
it's like Harry Potter.
Yeah, because when you go in there, it's not just hide and seek and you find the crystal, you pick it up off the ground and you're like, oh, cool. It's more like it calls to you, you walk into a room, and then it's like the Temple of Doom, where it's like on the other side of this like avalanche with snow monsters or something, and you're like, wait, can I pick another one? Like, are you kidding me? The Clone Wars also established the mythology of ancient lightsaber blades. They brought in the dark saber, which was an ancient Jedi weapon that had been stolen from the Jedi archives and had been wielded by a Mandalorian warlord in later episodes of the Clone Wars series. But it's interesting to see that the first lightsabers, as the Clone Wars depicts them, were much more mechanical constructs. This is not a real blade, it's an energy blade. Yeah, but the handle is more square and rectangular. It's not as pretty. But the cool thing that the Clone Wars did for us was they finally bridged the gap between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and they, from the first episode of Attack of the Clones, I was about to say from episode 1, and that would have confused the whole audience. No, from the first episode of Clone Wars, we see Obi-Wan and Anakin with their original trilogy handles. So we know that they've built these new handles. The question is, why did they build them differently from the ones they had before? Because Obi-Wan lost his in Phantom Menace, rebuilt it identically for Attack of the Clones. Why would he rebuild it differently again? I think is that because they were now in a war with the Trade Federation, it was almost like going from having a small semi-automatic to suddenly having like a rifle. You know, like they decided they needed beefier lightsabers for heavier combat. And it's clear that the Obi-Wan hilt that he carries here and in the original trilogy is that. It's a much heavier broadsword-looking weapon than that sort of fancy baton he had in the first 2 movies. Just a theory, just putting that out there. Now this is where lightsaber merchandising gets good, because finally they're starting to make lightsabers for us, meaning people over the age of 21. And in the shot on the left is one of the FX sabers that was brought out by Master Replicas, now owned by Hasbro. You might recognize the lady holding the lightsaber. They looked photorealistic in life. Like if you took a photo, like the lightsaber lights up, makes noises. It's made out of a metal handle that's completely accurate to this. And the next thing you know, you take a picture of it like that, and you're like, my God, I'm in the movie. The kids also had a great option. Lightsaber technology had advanced for children as well. You had the Force Action lightsaber, which was the first fully retracting, spring-loaded, sound and electronics synchronized lightsaber, and it would spring out with the accompanying sound effect and light up, but it fully retracted into the handle. It wasn't like one of these. It was like a fully retracted lightsaber. Now you might think that any toy collector in here might say, no, you're wrong. It was the droid's lightsaber from 1985. That thing was barely 8 to 10 inches long. Are you going to call that a lightsaber? I don't.
You could pick a lock with it.
I call it like a light butter knife. Like it's not. Why would anybody want that? Revenge of the Sith, you know, the props were all custom, as I said, and Anakin's lightsaber was no exception. They did not go back to the Graflex for Anakin's lightsaber. They wanted to make sure it looked the same. But they needed that slimmer handle with the better weight so that he could do the flips and the tricks and everything like that for the choreography. So they came up with almost like a vestige of the Graflex, an homage to the Graflex on the left. The right is the original Graflex. The left is the Revenge of the Sith hilt. It's funny too because this hilt shows up in some unusual places in the movie if you're looking carefully, not just Anakin. In the fight between Mace Windu and Emperor Palpatine, he is fighting him with a red saber the entire time. But he's not. Because if you look in these stills, you might be able to see, it might be hard to tell, this is the best ones I could get. He's actually holding Anakin's hilt. But Anakin wasn't there. So how do we explain this? Well, George Lucas, in editing, changed the scene in post. And he said, you know what? Anakin was originally supposed to be in the office when Mace Windu and his guys showed up to arrest the Emperor. And then the Emperor starts fighting with his own lightsaber, and then one of the Jedi disarms him, and what he does is Anakin doesn't know what to do, and before he can react, the Emperor just force grabs Anakin's lightsaber right off his belt and keeps fighting. And so the Emperor was supposed to be fighting Mace Windu with Anakin's saber. And then Mace was supposed to disarm him, and the lightsaber, instead of going flying out into the infinity, was supposed to roll back into the office. And at that point, Anakin's in there, as you see in the movie, and he picks it up and he doesn't know what to do, and then the rest of the scene unfolds as normal. They decided they needed Anakin to be away from the office, and they wanted Mace to be able to tell him, look, if you do what I say, I'll always trust you. You need to stay here. Anakin doesn't. Then he shows up. They thought it was a better character move. So they had to re-rotoscope the scene because they didn't want to refilm it. They just thought since Palpatine was covering the handle with both hands that you wouldn't notice. They thought Star Wars fans wouldn't notice.
Fools!
Let me say that one more time. They thought Star Wars fans wouldn't notice. Which brings us to something that I didn't see coming. I don't think any of us saw it coming. When that first trailer for The Force Awakens happens, one of the first shots is this. That lightsaber comes up. And I said, you have got to be kidding me. The Graflex lightsaber is back. I thought, how? I seem to very vividly remember, like it's burned into my brain. But it has returned in the most oddest of ways. She finds the lightsaber in a steamer trunk in the basement of a bar, being run by an alien Estelle Getty. How it got there, the characters actually answer the question, or they ask the question, and Maz Getty says that's a story for another time. So we hope that we'll see that story unfold in The Last Jedi. I'd really love to know. I've had some talks with some friends where they're like, "No, it's not important," and I'm like, "No, that's kind of important." You know, the whole movie hinges on that lightsaber to get started. So I really would like to know. It gives Rey visions when she touches it, and that means that there's something else going on here. In this shot from her vision, Kylo Ren is standing in the rain. There's some fan speculation that he's holding something in his left hand, and what he's holding in his left hand could be Luke's lightsaber from Return of the Jedi, could be Obi-Wan's original lightsaber, could be nothing, could just be fan speculation. We don't know. The other nice thing about The Force Awakens from the lightsaber perspective is that the lightsaber is now back to being a tool that anyone can use. The prop is now a Graflex again, which makes me happy because it just looks so cool. And the fighting style, while not back to the original trilogy, because I don't think anything should ever go totally back to the way it was. The fighting style has now become sort of a hybrid. It's more hack and slash. It's got a little bit of stabbing and stuff, but these two characters are both novices for the first time. It's not just a novice versus Darth Vader. It's two novices. So they both just seem like two kids fighting with broomsticks, which is nice because that makes it more real. The other new lightsaber that we get introduced to is Kylo Ren's. And Kylo Ren's was odd to me when I saw it fire up in the trailer because I thought, wow, that is a really welded together. It's literally venting extra energy from the sides because it can't contain itself. It has an exposed wire running all the way up the side of the hilt, which is the first time I've ever seen that on a lightsaber hilt. Now, Darth Vader's lightsaber had little wires that were finished on the top, but this is the first time I've seen an exposed wire. This is not a lightsaber. This is a proton pack. The Rebels show also introduced us to new lightsaber concepts. They introduced us to the idea of, you know how sometimes pirates would have like a flintlock with a dagger blade on the end, and they'd shoot their bullet and then they'd grab it and, you know, arr. Ezra kind of makes something like that. When he builds his first lightsaber in Rebels, it's a blaster with a lightsaber attached to it. So he can shoot people with it, or he can turn the blade on. I can't remember, has he ever had the blade on when he pulled the trigger? Has that ever happened? Does anyone know? I'm not doing the rude point. I'm doing the please help me point. No? Okay. And then we also get the Inquisitors that I like to call lazy Darth Maul. They didn't want to take the time to learn how to do real sword fighting spins and special moves. So they just put like electronic gizmo in the middle so that it would spin on its own, to the point that by the time Ahsoka is fighting Darth Vader in the climax of Season 2, the Inquisitors are literally using it like Inspector Gadget to fly around, which is like, can we kind of just not see that ever again? And you don't even have to explain where it went. I would just rather it go away. Yeah, just disappear. But these lightsabers inspired the next wave of toys, which were the Blade Builders. The Blade Builders are sort of a Legos concept where you can buy all these different lightsaber kits, and through a series of adapters, you can put them together. These are what's being sold now. I don't know as a kid if I would have been that into this because, my gosh, I mean, look at that. How do you play with that? How do you, but I guess some kids are just like, woohoo, and then they go crazy. For now, we are literally in a holding pattern with lightsabers in the saga. Holding pattern. because, thank you, because the saga began with an old man shoving this lightsaber in a young Luke's face. And now it continues with an old Luke having a young girl shove this lightsaber in his face.
That's why he looks so tired.
So for me, as I've gone through, 30 years of the saga, I feel like the Star Wars saga is about Luke Skywalker lightsaber confusion. I think that's really the message here. Because it started with a lightsaber made blue, and then made yellow. And then it was a blue lightsaber made green, made from a blue lightsaber. Then it was remade into a sleeker prop in the prequels, and then it inexplicably showed up in an old lady's hope chest after falling into infinity. So thank God the green lightsaber isn't here to confuse us again. Oh, no, wait, it is. The green lightsaber was actually made for The Force Awakens and never appeared. That is from the Force Awakens prop department on the DVD featurette, and there in the middle between the Kylo Ren and Luke's Graflex is the Return of the Jedi lightsaber, but it's never seen. And we don't know if it'll show up in Last Jedi either, so we're still waiting. So I say to those at Disney who have the answers to this, I am blue that I don't have the answers myself, and I'm green with envy that they do.